I had a teacher in the ministerial program that often would wait till the class was already in. She'd get there right on the dot, stand up and say, "Do you want to know the ultimate truth?" And everybody would raise their hand. I wonder how many people here, if I asked that question, would raise their hand. How many people here would want to know the ultimate truth? Wow, yes, just about everybody. I think everybody, actually. 42, okay. How many people only want to know 60% of the ultimate truth? No, this teacher would follow it by saying, how many of you really want to know the ultimate truth? Raise your hands. Really, really. And then she would say, would you give up your car to know the ultimate truth? Raise your hand if you give, honestly, don't lie to yourself. Would you give up your car to know the ultimate truth? Let me see how many hands. Okay, what about your house? Would you give up your house to know the ultimate truth? Let me see how many hands. Okay, they're diminishing, they're dwindling. Okay. How many of you would give up your car, your house, and all of your money to know the... Yes. Farouk, I didn't ask for you to raise your hands yet. Do I? Okay, but you're with me, right? Yes. All right. How many of you would give up your car, your house, and all of your money to know the ultimate truth? Let me see your hands. Be honest with yourself. Don't lie. Just say somebody's sitting behind you. You know, okay. All right, so we got eight people. All right. How many of you, after giving up your car, your house, and all your money, and found out you were happier after you gave them up, would even seek to get them back? Odd question. I won't take you there yet. Just think about it. The fact is, we don't have to give up all of that. In fact, I had a phone call just this week from a young man who was asking about the church. And he said, if in your church, will I have to give up smoking? I said, no. He said, if I come to your church, will I have to give up drinking? Because I drink beer on the weekends with my friends. I said, no. And he said, you're not one of those churches where you have to give up dancing. I said, no, you don't have to give up dancing. He said, what about close dancing? I said, no. He said, okay, look. He said, what about sex? Sex before marriage, sex anytime. Would I have to give it up? I said, no. And he said, well, is there anything I would have to give up if I come to your church? I said, just one thing. You'll have to give up the illusion of yourself as being a physical body. And he balked. But we really don't have to give up the body, but somehow we have to give up a part of the illusion that goes with the body. So we should always understand that in unity, we are on the path of the karma yogi. In other words, we don't renounce the world, we don't withdraw into a cave or a monastery. What we do is we remain in the world while we awaken to the truth. And that expands our awareness and brings us into a recognition that most people don't have in the limited definition of life. It brings up the recognition of the majesty and the miracle of being alive, the beauty of everything, because everything is God. And everything then, when you see it that way, is in fact beautiful. So here is our calling, very simply put. See how simple it is? It's not even coming up. There we go. Nope, it's the one before that. So we'll go there. No, come on. Oh, there we go. This is The Quiet Mind, the Sayings of White Eagle on page 79. This is our calling, by the way. If you don't have anything else, if you were ever stranded on a deserted island and you had this, you would have all you need to understand how to live effectively. I advise you to love not only your fellow man, but also the conditions of your life. Bear no resentment. Nothing happens out of order or by chance. And the great law brings those very conditions in your life which you need for growth. I advise you to love not only your fellow man, but also the conditions of your life. Bear no resentment. Nothing happens out of order or by chance. And the great law brings those very conditions into your life which you need for growth. How many people, just show me how many people believe that and how many people don't. Raise your hands if you believe that. Does anybody have an objection to it? Okay, I'm not challenging you. I mean, you can object. What's the worst thing that could happen to you? The ushers throw you out. That's probably not going to happen. It's hard for us to realize in the process of living that we have, in fact, each of us has become conditioned to a collection of beliefs which frame the personal life that we are living. No two people are living in the same life because each is living life through the screen of his or her collection of beliefs. So we may have a number of conflicts along the way because of the fact that we suppose that everyone is living in the same life, in the same world as I am, but it's simply not true. And the problem that we have as human beings is we reach a certain level of acceptance in the illusion. We reach a level where we no longer are seeking, in fact, to be awake, because we have accepted in our minds that we are awake. We suppose that I'm an objective observer, and I see everything in life the way it actually is, and so my point of view is correct, and that's why on many occasions we have a lot of conflict on a personal level. Because anyone operating from that particular bias is already incorrect. Until one is capable of knowing that he or she does not know, until that is possible for a person, there can be no divine revelation, awakening, and peace of mind that surpasses the understanding of the world. So I'm here today to try to help every one of us come to the recognition that I don't know. I don't fully know. And look at what he's saying there about bear no resentment. Nothing happens out of order or by chance. The great law brings those very conditions in your life which you need for growth. And of course, the great law being referred to there is the law of karma. So whatever going on in your life is there by some obvious opportunity for you to gain insight, a further expanded insight in how to live life more effectively, more beautifully, more harmoniously. But it comes down to that understanding. Let me ask you this. Suppose this is absolutely true, that every condition in your life right now is there by divine appointment. In other words, it's there by necessity of you awakening to what it is offering you to awaken to. And that is true. And suppose you decided to accept that everything in my life is there by divine appointment. And so I can accept it. It's not that I don't work through it, or figure out what it is I need to grow with, but I accept it. So, how many people could do that? How many people feel they could actually accept the fact that everything going on in their life right now is there by virtue of a lesson that they need to get? Let me see your hands. Okay, how many people disagree with that? And how many people, you don't have to disagree, you just have to say, I don't really kind of believe it right now, I'm not into it. That's fine. Just want you to know this. If you understood that everything happening in your life is there by virtue of lessons that you need to grow through and further awaken to life so that you can live more effectively, if you in fact surrendered and accepted that, what would happen to your feelings about other people? Just think about that. Anybody want to guess what would happen? What was that? Sameness. What was gratitude over here?
Gratitude.
What would be your feeling toward other people? Wonderful. Okay, you think it would be wonderful, Farouk? But then again, you're still on drugs. I mean, it's like, okay, just speak when you're called on, all right, please. Non-judgment. That's an unfair response. That's an unfair response because it's coming from my wife. She's not allowed to participate in this. But isn't that true? If you came to realize that everything happening in your life is there by some kind of divine plan so that you could grow and expand and live more beautifully, effectively, harmoniously, and you knew that's happening for everyone, that this grand intelligence we recognize to be God is not separate in some distant heaven, but that divine intelligence is ever at work to bring forth an enlightened humanity, and it's happening in every moment, how could you hold judgment or condemnation against anyone else? Because the experiences that they're going through, whatever it may be, they have no control over, except that they may be trying to work through them in a better fashion. So you see how forgiveness would be universal. Universal forgiveness. Think about this. Suppose you had universal forgiveness. You had not a second thought about anything anybody else was doing. You really didn't hold grudges. You had no resentment. There was no grievance. You simply said, I have my life to live. I'm going to try to live it more beautifully, more peacefully, more harmoniously, and you let everything else go. What would actually happen to you? Happy, wonderful, anybody else? People who gets the right answer right off the bat, we're not going to take an offering from you. Okay, yes, it would be free, happiness, all of that. It's true. What would happen is, if you released any judgment, condemnation, resentment for anyone, for any reason, you would enter a state of peace. Not the way the peace that the world understands, because in the world, in our limited, unawakened state of consciousness, we only have peace when our personal desires, our dictates, our opinions are being met by people and conditions around us. That's when we have, oh yeah, things are going great. And we're okay with that. But what if you were okay with anything and everyone just the way they are? Absolutely okay. Didn't even want to give yourself to any thought about it. You would enter a state of peace, divine peace. And so there's a difference between suffering and useless, unnecessary suffering. Can somebody give me an example of real suffering? Anybody? Okay, death in the family is good. All right, what's that? Starvation. Okay, it's real suffering.
Abused by others.
What?
Being abused by others.
Okay, being abused by others, physically abused. Back pain is real suffering. And chronic illness. Okay, there's enough things there. All right. That's real suffering.
Thinking. Your family.
No, don't give me thinking, because it's not real suffering. All right. Now I want you to give me examples. Give me examples of useless, unnecessary suffering. Worrying, jealousy. Go ahead. Bad hair day. Okay. What about all of that? It's a lot different, isn't it? Useless, unnecessary suffering. You know, broken relationships, things like that. Let's take a look at this. This is what Eckhart Tolle has to say. This is the modern-day master, Eckhart Tolle, from his book, Stillness Speaks. There are many subtle and not too subtle forms of suffering that are so normal they are usually not recognized as suffering and may even feel satisfying to the ego. Irritation, impatience, anger, having an issue with something or someone, resentment, complaining. You can learn to recognize all those forms of suffering as they happen and know, at this moment, I am creating suffering for myself. Take down the cathedrals, folks, because it's all right here. Get rid of the libraries full of the books and the self-help and all that. Either one connects to this truth, or one isn't really on the spiritual path. One really isn't deciding to awaken in the process of life in order to live more effectively. If you want to live more effectively, you will have to embrace this truth. There are many subtle and not too subtle forms of suffering that are so normal, you're so used to them, they are usually not recognized as suffering and may even feel satisfying to the ego. Such things as irritation, impatience, anger, having an issue with something or someone, resentment, complaining. You can learn to recognize all those forms of suffering as they happen and know at this moment, I am creating suffering for myself. And the fact of the matter is, those who are creating suffering for themselves are inadvertently creating it for other people around them. I call Eckhart Tolle a modern-day master because he makes it very clear about what it is we can do in order to free ourselves while we're on this journey in the world. What would happen if you really did take to task your own awareness? In other words, he said, if you recognize all those forms of suffering, you'll recognize that you're creating suffering for yourself. So what would happen if you were capable of catching yourself when you're complaining, catching yourself when you're gossiping, catching yourself when you're judging and condemning, just catching yourself when you're being irritable, and you decide instead of getting that momentary ego gratification of, I'm justified in doing this. I'm justified in doing this. These people are wrong. They should have known better. They should have done better. You drop that. You decide, suddenly, in the moment, you decide to become extraordinary, and you say, you know what? I prefer to choose that divine peace. So you have this holy pause. You don't react. You don't carry on because of the need to be right. You drop it. You release it, and you feel a peace that surpasses the understanding of the world. And that is the spiritual journey. That's what we're all about doing. If we're doing that effectively, what will happen is you'll start to enter a state of joy. The masters live in peace and joy. There's nothing that can rankle them. There's nothing you can steal from them, take from them. There's nothing you can do. They live in that peace and joy because even when you, in your limited state, unawake yet, you're telling them about some terrible things that people are doing to you, or conditions and circumstances that you have a right to complain about. When you're talking to somebody who's enlightened, you know what they're doing? You think they're listening. It's like you people that think your dog is listening to you. He knows better than to listen to you. You know what the enlightened person is doing? He is there allowing the peace that he feels all the time and the love and joy, and is trying to feel it move into you and through you and for you. That's what an enlightened person does. An enlightened person only brings peace, only bestows joy, only bestows love. So if you want to get to that place where you live from an enlightened perspective, then you have to take to task your own awareness. You have to have the ability, I'm going to ask you this right now, do you have the ability to just stop when negative feelings are rising within you? Or do you just react? Do you always react because you're special enough to react? You have enough clout, personal clout, to react and to get your own way? You still do that. Because as long as you're doing that, you're not awake and you're not going to be awake. You're not going to find the joy, the insight, the love, the peace, and the majesty of being truly alive. Because the universe is set up to bring you into life, a kingdom of God that is in the very presence and midst of you. That's what it's about. So, let's take a look again at what somebody told me that his name is pronounced Tolly. He said it rhymes with trolley. That's what they told me today. This is from his book, Stillness Speaks. Whenever you are able, have a look inside yourself to see whether you are unconsciously creating conflict between the inner and the outer, between your external circumstances at that moment, where you are, who you are with, or what you are doing, and your thoughts and feelings. Can you feel how painful it is to internally stand in opposition to what is? Where is the Master taking us? He's taking us into the eternal now. The eternal now. Not all of this unending thinking. Why? Why is he taking us into the eternal now right here with stuff like this? Why is he telling us to get involved in this place of now? What would happen if you were involved in the place of now? What happens to one who gets involved there? You became introspective. You decided that you didn't want to create suffering for yourself anymore, that you wanted to awaken, you wanted to live effectively. What have you found out? That living totally effectively is only living in this present moment now. That everything else is only conjecture, absolute personal conjecture, filtered through and twisted up in the limitations of your belief and your illusionary definition of yourself as being this special personality. What would happen? You would join the army of God. You would live in the now. What could you say has happened to a person that has taken the task in their own awareness, is awake to the fact whenever they're creating, all kinds of suffering for themselves, they're awake to that, so they're not doing it, they're pausing, they're letting it go, they're choosing peace instead, they're choosing harmony, they're choosing blessing. What could be said about a person that did that? Yeah, they would have all that. Yes, what else?
They're not
what would have happened to them? What's the only thing that's really in the way of God consciousness? The ego. The ego is the only thing. If a person ever gets to an enlightened state of consciousness, he has transcended the illusionary self. That's the reactive self, the one we were born with, raised with, educated to believe in, that it is going to bring you happiness because you'll figure out ways to use your limited, separate, special self to get control. And we just said about white ego, you don't really have any. You have an assumption of control, but you don't really have any. You know what control we have? We have control to choose peace instead of reaction. That's all the masters are doing at all. They're not reacting anymore. There's nothing in the world that can grab them and take them away from that peace, that insight, that joy of knowing what it means to be truly alive. There's nothing that can take them away from that because it is the pearl of great price. It is the greatest thing in the world to wake up in the morning and not have a concern or a consideration about how you're going to manipulate this day, because that's all the limited thinking of the world is about.